Yali Madath, and welcome to tonight's session of Conversations with the Capital. My name is Garima Giovanni, and I am the CNP member for the Administrative Committee in the Southwest region. We're glad that you've decided to join us today to hear about the experiences of American Ismailis who have held positions in local, state, and even federal politics and policy. Today, we are excited to speak with Ashish Hamarani from Houston, Texas. Ashish currently serves as a trustee for the Stafford Municipal School District. He is the youngest and the first South Asian ever to serve as a trustee in the district's history. In addition to his role as a trustee, Ashish currently leads acquisitions for CivicCap Partners, a real estate private equity firm that invests in affordable workforce housing. Our moderator for tonight is Jamil Jaffer. Jamil is the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University Law School. Formerly, Jamil was the chief counsel and senior advisor of Senate Foreign Relations, as well as the former associate counsel to President George W. Bush. As you can see, we have great talent with us today, and we hope this session allows you to learn more and to be inspired by the journey and contributions of our fellow Ismailis. If you happen to have any questions during the session, feel free to submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and be sure to view this session in gallery mode. Thank you. Over to you, Jamil.
Thanks, Karima, for kicking us off, and Ash, thanks for being here with us today. Really appreciate it. It's great to be here with you. So right up front, I just want to make sure that you're speaking only in your personal individual capacity. You're not representing any current or former employers or speaking as an elected official. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Let me actually take a quick second, Noreen, to thank Noreen, Karima, Asma, Alim, Zach, everyone else behind the scenes, and of course you, and to everyone watching here tonight. Thank you so much for participating in this.
Awesome. So listen, over the past few weeks, we've talked to Ismailis that have worked in the White House, in the Senate, the State Department. We've talked to an Ismaili ambassador, an Ismaili judge. And yet, with all that, you're our first elected official. With your service as an elected member of the Stafford Municipal School District Board. So I've got to ask, how did this all get started? How did you decide to run for office?
I'm honestly humbled by the guests you guys have had on here. They've been amazing. I've actually enjoyed watching them all very much, and you've done an excellent job as the host. For me, it kind of really goes back to my values and really my foundation on who I am. I've always been very passionate about education, specifically public education, and I'm a really big fan of helping others achieve their American dream. And for me, it really comes down to three things you need in life that helps you achieve that American dream for every child. Number one is you need safe, stable housing. Number two is you need a quality education. And number three is you need access to healthcare. So for me to be able to make that impact, and when that opportunity presented itself to be able to help others get that education, really pay it forward, I definitely jumped in with both feet, and something that I'm very, very passionate about.
Yeah. Well, so you grew up in Mumbai, India, right? Or you were at least born there, right? The early years of your life. What was it like growing up there, and what are some of the key elements you remember about your life before you moved here to the U.S.?
Absolutely. So Mumbai was a very, very different place. Growing up there in the early 90s, and again, this is before, just for context, this is before India really blew up and you had this economic growth that happened kind of in the late 90s and the early 2000s. So yeah. India was a very, very different place at that time. And so growing up there, you learn to live with very limited means. And you also learn and you really see income disparity we talk about that in this country, but in India, it's really prevalent. You drive down the street and you're going to see people living in slums, and you're going to see people that are multi-millionaire movie actors, things like that. And so it really helped shape who I was as an individual.
And there was a pretty exciting moment at one point in your life, right? Elementary school back in the late 90s. Talk to us about that moment in elementary school there in Mumbai.
Absolutely. I'm never going to forget this moment. So we're all sitting there, and this is, again, we're in a school, and it's the K through 10 school. And you have, we didn't have intercom systems, obviously, back then. So you had this guy, and he's kind of like this, I don't want to call him a custodian, but he's like a utility player, does everything. So he's the guy that's your intercom system. So he comes running up the stairs, goes to every single classroom and says, hey, come down. The principal's got a big announcement. He's running this, going through every single classroom, and all the students, we all kind of make our way down the stairs, and then we all line up in this big courtyard, and we're waiting like, what is this announcement? This has got to be exciting. The fact the whole school's here.
Yeah.
Then the principal finally comes out, and she goes, we have to show you something. We're like, oh my God, what's she about to show us? And so we all kind of lined up in front of her office. And again, this is like hundreds of kids lined up. And we all get to go in and go see what this big surprise is. And we're taking turns, and you get 2 seconds. They warn you only have 2 seconds. And again, they're a little more liberal with corporal punishment in India. So we listened to our teachers back then.
Right.
And so we're going, and finally it's my turn. I get to that front of the line, and I'm so excited. I'm like, what am I going to get to see? And it's a computer. And it was the first computer in our school. And it was a huge, huge deal for us to have a computer in the school and just be in the building. Unfortunately, I never got to use a computer or even see it turned on. I just got to kind of see the back of it. And they said, this is it. This is such an exciting moment for the whole school. And it was. I was thrilled about it. And I was, this 7 or 8-year-old kid who just had never seen a computer.
Amazing. So now your parents ultimately decided, though, to move to the United States. And when you were 8 years old, why did they decide to move to the U.S.? And how was that for you? Was it difficult? Was it easy? How did you find that?
That was actually a really fun time for me. It was tough in some sense because it was hard to pick up your life and just leave. But this is a time in the late 90s, you really had this popularization in Bollywood that created this amazing experience of what America is, and really kind of created this image in my head as a kid, like, oh, America's going to be this wonderful thing, and I'm going to get off, and there's going to be a supercar that's going to come pick me up, and I'm going to get in a helicopter and go everywhere. And that was the image I had. So I was thrilled at the idea of going to the United States. Now, I know for our parents, it was much harder to move because they were much later in their lives. They had established lives here. They had jobs. This is their culture, and this is where their friends were. So for them, that move really was motivated by me and my sister. They wanted to give us a better education, give us a better life, and just have that hope for us that we can live in a country that provides a better environment for them.
Yeah, but you had come to the U.S. before. You had been here on a trip, right? So what was the difference between your sort of your tourist visit to the U.S. and then your actual move to the U.S.? Where did you arrive? What did you do? How did it go?
Yeah, so we actually, the first time we ever came to the United States was 2 years prior to we moved. And that was my first time to come visit, my only time really to come visit the United States before we moved here. And we landed in New York, which is, the immigrant store. You land in New York, you fly in there, in our case, not by ship, but we came into New York. We had a little bit of family there. We spent a couple of days in a tiny little apartment. And I still remember my uncle would vacuuming and someone would hit the broom from the bottom because it was so loud. And it was a really humble place to be. But we were excited. We were in the United States now. And so that was a very exciting moment. And then we actually went over to San Antonio where I had a decent amount of family and got to visit with them and got to see what that looked like. And then we actually spent a little bit of time in LA on the West Coast. And LA is just so different than the rest of the country. And, we had family there, and I had a cousin my age and got to show me around. So really got to experience America and see it firsthand. And the fun part was actually when we got to go back. Because we took a microwave, which, again, no one had a microwave at that time. And we took some microwave popcorn, which was a very, very unique. No one had heard of microwave popcorn in India. So
really?
My sister and I were the two most popular kids in the entire kind of community because all the kids would want to come by and check out our microwave popcorn and try some American candy. So that was actually a really, really fun trip to come here and then take some of America back home.
That's pretty cool. So you get here, right? You arrive in San Antonio. And then eventually you move to Houston. What was different about life in the U.S. and like the opportunities? Like, was it what your parents expected? What was it like relative to what you'd experienced in India growing up?
Yeah. So when we first moved here, it was definitely kind of a learning curve, right? We spoke a little different. We learned British English there, and you talk with a little bit of an accent. So life is a little challenging at first. And, you at school, you're getting bullied because you're a young kid who talks different and looks a little different. And even in, it wasn't even just school, it was also in Jamaat, kind of like going to RC. Like some of the kids weren't really nice to you because they didn't really know where you're from. But regardless of all that, I was just so excited to be here. Now, for my parents, it was definitely a much tougher journey because now they're in this new country. They gave up, their business. They sacrificed all that. And now my dad's working in a gas station, working 70 hours a week. My mom's trying to do a business on the side at home, selling Indian outfits. It was a very, very tough financial time and just challenging and, really trying to climb that ladder in America and make it. And it was a very uncertain time because you don't know if you don't make it, there's a chance you could go back.
Yeah, yeah. And so, you go to school here in the United States. Was there a computer at your new school?
Oh my gosh, this was so fun. I will never forget the first day of school. So I walk in, and this school was overflow, so we actually had to be in kind of one of those trailer schools, which are
Right.
still 10 times nicer than the school I'd been in. So I walk in the first day of school, and I see a computer in front of my teacher's desk. I'm like, whoa, my teacher's got a computer. I mean, she must. And then I see a second computer, and apparently this is like the student's computer. I'm like, I'm gonna get to use a computer sometime in this year, and my teacher's got two computers in one room. I could not believe it. I was just astonished and just floored at the idea. And I was like, she must be a big deal. Like, this can't be typical. Like, this is probably because she's like a principal. I just don't know about it.
Right, right.
And like, fast forward a week, I go to the computer lab, and there's a computer for every student, the one-to-one. I could not believe it. I could absolutely not believe it. Now, one thing that I did learn from that experience is, like, the kids that had all access to all this education, they weren't really just smarter than me because they had this education, because they had all this technology. Now, granted, it probably helped them, and they had, abilities to do things that
Right.
I learned. But one of the things that for me was, I was actually the smartest kid in my class when it came to math and science. And you've probably watched the movie Mean Girls, and one of the things Lindsay Lohan's character says is, math is the same in every language, and that like resonates with me very, very well. And so to me, I had amazing, amazing teachers who didn't have access to all these things in India, but they were still so good at their job that as a kid, as an 8-year-old, I was miles ahead of my peers here who had, access to the best world-class technology. So
Yeah.
that really taught me something.
Interesting. So even though you arrived in San Antonio, you eventually moved to Houston, right? And you went to a public magnet high school. Tell us why you kept moving around, not just from San Antonio to Houston, but within Houston. And why did you ultimately go to this math science focused magnet school?
Yeah. So for me, my third grade year when I actually moved to the United States, I moved 3 times in third grade. So I was like, all right, in fourth grade, I'm going to move 4 times now. And I was kind of preparing myself for that.
Right.
Fortunately, I only moved once in fourth grade, but, kind of part of going up that rung and each ladder at a time in America, you tend to move and, you have different economic opportunities. So we moved to Houston because there's opportunity for my dad to, lease a store and to start their own gas station and really start something of their own. So we made the move, and we had no family in Houston, no support system, and kind of gave it a try. Now, what was really incredible when we were moving to Houston, and this is before the internet, people forget, now you can just open things up in the internet. We didn't know what schools to live in, where things are zoned, what school is where.
Right.
My mom actually took advantage of the SEED program, and this is something that was so important to us. And for those that don't know, it's kind of the Smiley ranking system, the SEED, that really helped define where we lived. And she spent hours on it, and it was so helpful because the people that were volunteers there, they were doing this just as volunteers, and they helped us find, hey, these are the places to live. This is something you can afford that's actually zoned to good schools. And there's not many of that. There's very few places that fit that category. And so we went there. And I had the opportunity to kind of go up that public school ranks. And again, when it finally came time to high school, I applied for that STEM magnet program. It was actually a computer engineering program. And the reason I did it was, again, I was good at math and science. I found that super interesting, and I felt like that's where the future was. So I applied for that program.
Yeah, and so we'll come back to this STEM high school again, but just preview for the audience what impact going to the STEM magnet school had on your life, and why, and what it resulted in on the back end of this when you joined the school board.
Absolutely. So even before I actually joined the school board, I was part of the long range facility planning committee. And what that committee really did was a bond committee. And we passed a $62 million bond. And one of the things in that bond was to create a STEM academy from third grade to 12th grade. And that was something I was a big proponent of. And then once that bond passed, and it took about a year after that when I got on the school board, and now I actually lead up that committee that runs the STEM Academy and is creating the curriculum, putting everything in admissions and getting all of that lined up, which has been super, super valuable for me to have that perspective of being a student and now actually being able to facilitate something like this.
That's crazy. That's pretty wild. So when you were in high school, though, so you're there in Houston, you're at this high school, the STEM high school, and you had a chance to intern at Texas Instruments. What was that like, and how did that shape your career?
Yeah, that was actually a really, really unique experience. And so TI, Texas Instruments, was actually located in Stafford, which is where I live now. And at that time, I actually didn't live in Stafford. I lived in Missouri City. And so I got to go visit Stafford. And I kind of got to experience what it felt like to be inside Stafford and understand what Stafford was. Now, granted, one of the things that's kind of unique in Houston is you have a lot of Jamaat khanas in a very small amount of space, especially the southwest side. And so there's a Sugarland that's called, there's a Jamaat khana that's called Sugarland. It's actually not in Sugarland. It's actually in Stafford.
Really?
Yeah, and so for years I grew up, and again, it's the reason they called it Sugarland because that's where majority of the people that were attending there were from. And now there's actually a new one, and this is before the permanent center was built. So once the permanent center was built, that's actually in Sugarland. And so it's kind of funny because people get confused when they type it in and they're like, wait a minute, I'm going to Stafford. But so I still call it, I jokingly call it Stafford Jamaat Khana. But for me, I grew up there. So I was very familiar with Stafford. And I had this internship at TI where I really got to kind of learn what Stafford is. And I really enjoyed the city. It's located geographically in a very great place.
Yeah.
So it kind of sparked my interest in Stafford and kind of helped me understand what that city was like.
Cool. And then so you graduate high school, you go to UT Austin. What would you graduate with? You got, what did you major in? And how did you start there? Like, how did your whole sort of academic career at UT Austin go?
Sure. So, of course, given the fact that, I was in this computer engineering program, my major automatically became, in UT Austin was to go be a computer electrical engineer.
Well, you're Indian, right? I mean, so of course you were a computer engineer. I mean, like, what else would you do?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought at the time. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And again, I was very, very fortunate. My parents actually I wasn't like one of those, kids in Three Idiots where he's like, my kid's going to be an engineer. I never had that moment. My parents were very supportive of whatever I wanted to do. And so I still decided like, okay, this is something that I'm good at. So let me try it. And then I kind of had this changing moment. When I was my freshman year, we had Parents' Day. And at Parents' Day, it had all the parents of these freshman engineers show up, and we're all in this massive auditorium. And the dean's talking to the entire class, and he's, going on about how great the program is, and he's thankful for it. And then this dad stands up, and the dad's an engineer, and he stands up and he says, "What are you doing to prepare my kid so that 20 years down the line, when he's midway late in his career, that some new kid out of undergrad or with an MBA, some business kid isn't telling him what to do?" And the dean kind of stumbled and didn't really have any answer for that. And that kind of got me thinking, like, am I really learning the soft skills, the things that I really want to learn? And I decided to change my major. I should become an economics major. And we had some soul searching at the time. I was like, what do I want to do? It wasn't just like, oh, where I want to go. And my parents were super supportive. Again, they didn't push me like, you got to be a businessman, doctor, engineer. It wasn't any of that. They were very open. Now, granted, it's probably easier discussion now that I was going to be, an arts major, something that they knew would be tough for me long term economically. Nothing against arts majors. I think we need them in our society, but there was a reality, and they knew about it, and they wanted, they came to this country to give us economic opportunity we wouldn't have. So I actually graduated with a degree in economics.
Gotcha. And by the way, for the audience, we will be taking questions, in about 20, 25 minutes or so. So please throw your questions in the Q&A box. And we'll get to them here shortly. So now, while you're at UT Austin, and I want to be sensitive here because I know this is an uncomfortable topic, but a tragedy took place while you were on campus. Tell us briefly what happened, and how did it affect your views on school-age students and the need to protect them?
Yeah, and it's tough to talk about this, but I think it's important to talk about it, and I thank you for asking me about it. So when I was there, September 2010, this was my sophomore year at the University of Texas. We had a shooter that came on campus. And I remember that day very, very clearly. It's one of those moments that's just ingrained in your life. And I was sitting there and we start getting text messages from my friends asking, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I have no idea what's going on at that time. And, within minutes we get a text message, and I'm sitting, with a bunch of other people, and we all get that text message from the university saying there's an active shooter on campus. And it was a very, very scary moment. Now, fortunately for the university population, no one other than the gunman actually was hurt during that incident, and our police department was ready for it. And one of the things that happened, and I grew up, post Columbine. So even from a young age, even when I was in elementary school, we had drills that we ran for active shooters, and that was just a reality that we lived in. I mean, I still remember the code word till this day, and this was when I was in 4th grade, was the teachers check your boxes, and all the kids would huddle up in a corner. The teacher would close the door and lock it, and that was something that we grew up with. And so you never think it's going to happen to you. You always see it on TV, and you think, oh, it's going to happen to someone else. That's never going to happen here. That's TV. But it happened, and it was a scary moment. And one of the scariest things for me was when my mom called me, that same day, and she was worried. She'd seen the news, and the voice, I could just tell by her voice how relieved she was when she found out that I was completely okay. That was just a scary moment. And one of the things that people don't talk about or realize is once the incident's over, it's no longer covered by the news. No one talks about it after the fact. But we all think about it. Every time I walk by that it was in the center of our campus. Every time I walked there, every time I went to that same library, it always stuck with us. And I still remember, and it wasn't just me, it was everyone. And I still remember that we were sitting in class, and this was months later. Someone dropped a book. Normally, no one, bats an eye. Every single person in that classroom had such an exaggerated reaction to that. And it was just one of those things that kind of stuck with you. And so for me, I knew how important that was. And I knew that that's something we have to do. We have to keep our kids safe. And that was actually the top priority in my agenda when I was campaigning, was safety. And how could we keep our kids safe? And that's something we've done in our district. And I can't go into details about everything because a lot of that's behind closed doors for obvious reasons. But we've done tremendous number of things. We've invested so much money to make sure that our kids are safe, because that is ultimately the most important thing. And even now with COVID going on, right? It's not just always active shooters. It could be so many things.
Right. So you graduate, right? And you're obviously, excited about public service and education policy. What did you end up actually doing for work, and how did you end up in that field?
Yeah, so I actually started working in commercial real estate. I always found that super interesting. I was an economics major, had a minor in business. I always found real estate a very interesting asset class. So I got into the capital market side. And then from there, I kind of got the dream job that I always wanted, which was to be in a private equity shop in commercial real estate, traveling to all the great markets in the United States, where I was going to Portland, I was going to Boston, I was going to, all the fun markets where millennials want to go hang out. I was traveling, I was having a great time. I loved what I was doing. I was in portfolio management for, the dream place to be in Houston, which is where I wanted to be. And so I had a remarkable time there. And that's kind of how my career transitioned.
Yeah. But after a few years of jobs, right, you had this amazing job, and yet you left it all behind and you went to a different job that had a social impact. Tell us about that, how you ended up there, why you did that, and then what you did afterwards.
Absolutely. So I actually had the opportunity to go work for Workforce Housing. So this was still a startup at the time. And everyone's like, wait a minute, you're leaving, the premier firm as a Limestone at the time, like you're leaving Limestone to go work for this startup. Like, what are you thinking, man? I told them, I was like, look, I grew up in one of these apartment complexes. Like when I lived in San Antonio, early times when we lived in Houston, I grew up in an apartment complex that's workforce housing where there's a significant shortage of this. And people are like, oh man, you're just another millennial trying to change the world. Like, what are you doing? You're leaving the dream job. Like, people are lined up to take your job. And to me, it was more than that. And I wanted to do something that was greater. And what was really fascinating, so the founder of that company that I was leaving, he actually found out I was leaving, and he was like, hey, Ash, I'm super sad to see you leave, but I'm so excited for the field you're going to go work in, because you're going to do great things there. And it's also a field that needs people to go work in. And now fast forward about 2 years, and he actually sold that firm, and he started his own firm, and he wanted to focus on workforce housing. And so him and I were catching up, and he's like, hey, I would love to have you join us. And so I ended up becoming hire number 1 for Civic Cap Partners, which is where I am now.
So wait, so just to be clear, so you left this amazing firm that's doing all this cool stuff. Everyone's like, what are you doing? You must be crazy. You go do this sort of thing that's a passion of yours. And then the founder of that firm sells that firm and starts at the same kind of thing, and you go to work for him?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Crazy. That's wild.
It was meant to happen.
Yeah. So now, was it worth? I mean, so that's a pretty big risk, right? Leaving this established firm that's, you took a big risk, go to the startup, ended up going to another startup. Was it worth taking the risk, leaving that ideal job and going to this sort of thing that you care about, this multifamily housing?
Absolutely. I think it's been so rewarding. And again, going back to, the 3 things that you need, I absolutely think it was. I think it's been one of the most rewarding experiences for me. And, the funny thing is, people like, I always think of my public service and what I do privately in my, my career to be very different things, but there's so much overlap between the two. And I constantly feel that overlap when people in one circle end up knowing people in the other circle. And,
right.
And the skill set that I use in my job actually really impacts what I do in the school district, and you'd be able to utilize those skills. So an example of that is we had a bunch of bonds that, were at these high interest rates that were done in 2000s, 2007, before. And I looked through them. I was like, wait a minute, like we're paying crazy astronomical interest rates. Let's refinance these. Let's use our option to call these bonds and let's go ahead and refinance. And we did that. And that was one of those things that saved the district millions of dollars.
Wow.
And I was so fortunate to be able to use kind of the skill set that I have, in my career to be able to use in my school board life.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I want to step back there for a second. So we talked a lot about your private life and sort of how you got to where you are in your career. But let's go back to sort of when you first, when you graduated college, you arrive in Missouri City, Texas. You weren't in Stafford yet, and this is sort of the beginning of your involvement in politics, right? So you went to a local event, right, a boat race, right? And what happened at that boat race, and how did that get you your first intro into politics? It seems kind of odd, right? What does a boat race have to do with politics?
Yeah, so that's a really funny story. So I actually was part of what's called a dragon boat. So dragon boat racing, if you don't know, it's like a 20-man boat and you all kind of row together. I actually rowed crew in college. So I love being on the water, and granted, dragon boat and rowing are very different sports, but they're both on the water, so I enjoyed it. So I decided to sign up, and I joined this HOA team that I saw like a little ad for. I was like, hey, this seems fun. And the HOA team, by the way, the HOA is not like a traditional HOA. It's like 10,000 home HOA. So it's massive. So I joined this team, and we actually ended up doing pretty well. We won our division, and one of the things they did was they wanted to honor us at the next big annual HOA meeting. And so I show up to this HOA meeting, and now this was a day where it was just pouring rain, and it was just crazy storm. So not a lot of people showed up to this. I was actually the only person on my entire team that showed up for this. So I got to receive this award, and I joked. I was like, yeah, I rowed this 20-man boat by myself. That's how we did it. But one of the cool things of being at this meeting was it was a very intimate setting. And the city council member in Missouri City who oversaw that district happened to be there. And I kind of started having a conversation with him. And again, I was, I looked very different than everyone else in that room. I was young,
right,
South Asian. And so I didn't really fit that profile. So it kind of caught everyone's attention. And I had no agenda. I wasn't there because I worked for the city. I wasn't there because I was trying to advocate for my business or anything like that. I was just receiving an award. So he wants to appoint me. He sees me and he's like, hey, look, our district can appoint someone for the zoning board of adjustments. And, you'd be great for it. So why don't I appoint you and just fill out this application? And, he emailed
just like that
next day. And I was like, yeah, sure. I'd love to do it. Like, this sounds cool. And again, I'm in real estate. So I was like, yeah, this seems very applicable. So why not? And so I do that. And then we fast forward. I actually moved. And so I moved to Stafford.
Okay.
And I decided, and so I get an email from them saying, hey, are you still interested in this? I'm like, no, guys, I already moved. But I was like, this seems super interesting. I kind of was looking forward to being on this board. So I ended up going to Stafford's website, and I'm there because I'm just a new resident. And let me backtrack a little. Let me actually tell you a little about Stafford. Stafford's a city in suburban Houston. It's north of Sugar Land. It's between Houston and Sugar Land. It's 20,000 people nighttime, 60,000 daytime. It's a very unique city because it actually has no city property tax. And in Texas, and Jamil, you probably know this, we don't have an income tax.
Right.
So all our money comes from either sales tax or property tax. And for a city to not have a property tax is unheard of, especially a city that size. But we also had the same mayor for 50 years who unfortunately recently passed away. But Stafford's a very unique place. And I kind of went there because I really was interested in how Stafford's run, and I liked where it was located. So I go on the website and I see, and I look for the same, and I'm on the website. I see the exact same board has an open position and they're looking for people. So I type up this email, send them that email. I get a call from someone from the city, and he goes, hey, I saw your application. Like, congratulations for just moving to the city, but we actually have a town hall tonight. So why don't you show up to a town hall and introduce yourself to the entire city?
Okay.
And yeah, why not? Okay, that sounds fun. So I show up to this town hall not knowing what to expect. It's in this massive auditorium, and I'm kind of thrown, into this there's hundreds of people there, and I have no idea what's going on in politics. There's some politicking going on, and I listen to the presentation, and then they have this open forum where people can speak. And so I'm like, okay, this sounds kind of interesting. So I sit back and hear a couple of people speak, and I'm a little intimidated at this point because I have never done something like this before. I'm sitting in front of, in my mind, the ivory tower at that point is, the city council members and the esteemed mayor. I'm just a normal guy. Like, what am I going to have to say to them? And I hear other people speak, and then I was like, you know what, let me go sign up. And I signed my name on this list. I actually picked probably the worst town hall in history of Stafford to do this in. because there's about 200 people there that were there, and animal rights activists are important, and they, but they also have a really amazing job of kind of collectively coming to these meetings and really advocating for their position. So I'm at the end of like hundreds and hundreds of these people who are, saying the same thing about why they want, this big thing that was this bill that was going to be in front of city council at the next meeting.
Okay.
So I wait there, and I'm there for hours. So I'm like, should I leave? I got to get out of here. Like, I've worked the next morning, but I'm like, I've already invested too much time, and I've got to sit through this. So I finally, and I'm sweating, and I'm nervous. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to tell these guys. I finally get my chance, and I go speak, and all I do is introduce myself, say a couple things, and tell them that I'm interested. I literally just said, hey, I'm interested in being involved in the city. And that's all it took. And after my speech, a couple of the city council members, they're still on the city council, Councilwoman Regina Rosas and Councilman Ken Matthew came up to me. They actually approached me and said, hey, we really like what you had to say, and welcome to the city. Can I have your phone number? And
Really?
I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, like, you guys are city council, like, you guys are a big deal. Like,
right.
You're talking to me. This is kind of cool. And one of the things I learned kind of over time is people want feedback, especially at the local politics level. People want people that want to get involved and actually care and don't have an agenda, right? I had no agenda. I was just there because I cared about the community. There is a shortage of people like that. So if you're interested, and everyone I presume that's watching this is probably interested in that, just go show up and go say hi, go meet them and say you're interested. Raise your hand and say, hey, I would love to volunteer with the city. And then fast forward, I actually got appointed to the Long Range Facility Planning Committee, which is the one I mentioned earlier. That's the one with the bond. And then after that was.
So I just want to understand this. So you go to this random town hall. So you first send a random email, right? Which all came from you being at this event with this boat race thing where you meet one councilman. You then send an email to a random other person. They invite you to some town hall. You go to town hall. You meet these council members, and you get appointed to a commission, right, or a committee that's in charge of in charge of getting the bond done for a magnet academy like the one that you went to in high school.
That's right. And it was more than just a magnet academy. It was a brand new middle school. It was a brand new pre-K center. So it was a big deal, and it was kind of cool. And they wanted someone. And again, I show up to this committee meeting, and I'm by far the youngest one there.
Right.
But they're also welcoming. Like, they like the idea of having someone young who has a different perspective and very welcoming about it, which was such a pleasant experience. But also kind of taught me, like, hey, what does this school do? We don't understand, behind the scenes. We've all been students. But we don't understand what happens behind the scenes in schools. So that was a great way to kind of learn that.
Yeah. So we're about to take questions here in about 5-10 minutes. So people, put your questions in if you have them. But so here you are, right? You've met all these important folks. You're on this committee, right? How did you decide you're going to run for office?
Yeah. So after the committee, I actually got into a commission, which was a home rule charter commission. And that commission is like the home rule charter is basically a constitution for a city. And so being on that commission was actually a big deal. I didn't realize this at the time. Every single person who's ever been on that commission has been elected, and it happens every 4 years. And I was actually part of a class of 7 that were part of that commission, and 4 of the 7 were current or former elected officials. And so I had the opportunity to kind of go be on a commission. It was a televised commission, so everyone got to see me on TV. People started learning my name. And then I get a call after this commission's over. I get a call, and a lot of people are asking me, "Oh, when are you going to run for office? When are you going to run for office?" I get a call from a gentleman who is the longest sitting city council member in the city. And he tells me, hey, there's a position on the school board, and I think you should run for it. And I'm like, I give him the same answer. I'm like, no, I'm not going to run for it. I'm still in school. And again, I'm getting my master's at this time as well as working full time.
Right.
And I say, no, I can't do it. And he's like, wait, when do you graduate? I was like, May. He's like, perfect. Your term won't start till May. And he's like, don't worry, put your name there. No one's even going to want to run against you. They're going to see your name. They're going to get scared. Just put your name down. So I talked to my family, and, we have this discussion, and I sell them everything that he sold me. I'm like, oh, it's going to be easy. I just got to show up for once a month. It's going to be, not too long, not too much of a time commitment. And man, I have never been so wrong in my life, Jamil. But that time I was absolutely wrong. And so I sign up, and next thing I know, I have, 4 other people that are signing up for this. And we're running a full-blown race.
Yeah.
3 other people that signed up as well, and we're running this full-blown race. And it was such a challenging and fun experience. And again, I've never been involved in a campaign. I've never run a race before. I've voted for people. Sure, I've done research on candidates just to figure out who I'm going to vote for. but I have no idea how to do any of this. I don't know how to do fundraising. I don't know how to do any, how do I get signs? Where do I get signs? What are the rules? What are things you have to put on your signs?
Right.
Fortunately, I was able to learn all that. It's all on the internet, and it's actually not as challenging as people think. So if you're watching this and you're thinking you want to run, it's actually really not as challenging and intimidating as people may imagine. Now, granted, it's a lot of work. You're going to go knock on a lot of doors. You're going to go send out flyers. You're going to have a website. You're going to do a lot of different things. But it's actually very, very doable. And so I run for this election, and I get elected, and I won, and that's my inauguration day. So that day actually is May 13th. I will never forget that because that's also my first anniversary. So the same day I got inaugurated was also the first anniversary for my wife, and she's a doctor. So she was actually not able to make it for my inauguration. And so I was like, oh, don't worry. Again, this is where I feel like I've never been so wrong in my life. It's like, don't worry, these meetings don't run that long. I'll be home before, it's way before midnight. We'll celebrate. We'll have, we'll just have dinner or something. I didn't get home my first meeting until 2:30 a.m.
Whoa. Well
past my anniversary time. And so one of the funny things is you do end up, it is the commitment, while it's very flexible because they're catering to people who are working full-time jobs, it tends to be fairly flexible in that, but you have a lot of time that gets put into it. So all your meetings are in the evenings, but you end up having about, we have months where you end up having, 4 or 5 meetings, and there's weeks where we had 3 meetings in a row. It gets challenging at times, but it's a lot of fun, and it's one of the most rewarding things you can do.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about your platform. You mentioned earlier that, your experience with at what happened at UT in that tragic moment, that affected your platform on safety. Talk to us about how else you're growing, the way you grew up and the things your experiences had, what the impact they had on your ultimate platform and office.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, number 1 was safety. And then number 2 for me was technology. One of the interesting things is, according to World Economic Forum, 65% of the jobs that the kids that are starting primary school today don't even exist. We don't know what they are. We have no idea what these kids are going to be doing. So how do we prepare them for that? We know that there's a lot of great technology out there. And so how do we push that forward to them? And one of the, the things that's come out of COVID is we had to go to an online platform for learning. And how do we create that platform? And how do we make sure, because not every kid in our district has a device at home. Not every kid has internet at home. So how do we ensure that all our kids have, some level of technology where they can still access and have the same, playing field? Like Ash Hamarani in, early 90s didn't have any of those things. So how can he make sure that he has the same resources and he can still continue to learn? So we actually approved 1-to-1 iPads for every single one of our kids. So we spent millions of dollars to make sure every single child in our district gets their own iPad, and they take it home, they can learn from it. We also have hotspots. So if kids that don't have internet, they can come check out a hotspot and have internet at home. We try to enable our kids and give them this technology. And I also believe that, good teachers are underpaid. So our first year, we gave them a $5,000 raise across the board. And now what I'm really working on and focused on is really getting our top teachers to be able to make $100,000 a year, which in Texas, they make half that roughly. And so we really are putting an incentive plan together, and I'm really on the forefront of this, and this is cutting edge news, and we're pushing this, and hopefully it gets pushed across, and we can have our top teachers making the money that I think they deserve. And again,
awesome
teachers I had back in India were amazing, and I know I have some of those teachers. Jamil, I'm sure you've had some excellent teachers in your life, and so really pushing that forward. And then thirdly, it's taxes, right? Property taxes, we all pay for them. Even if you are a renter, you're paying property taxes. Why rent? So let's lower that property tax rate down as much as possible. And again, I kind of mentioned this earlier, is I was able to save the district's million on just doing that refi. So we're able to do all these things and still lower taxes. Lastly, I think this kind of goes back to the safety. We have free breakfast, free lunch, free dinner for all our students now. That didn't exist when I took the board. So my first year on the board, we were able to approve that as a board, and it's free for every single one of our students. And during COVID, we actually went and hand-delivered meals using our bus drivers to these students. And so food insecurity is something important as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. I do want to take some questions from the audience. So one of the people out there, Ian Kamali, mentioned that you were one of their role models when they were a participant in Camp Mosaic. What were some of the aspects of campaigning that you hadn't anticipated?
Yeah, I remember Ian as well. So thank you so much for that question. It's a great question. I actually want to talk a little about Camp Mosaic after I answer this question. There were some real surprises. I didn't realize how important going knocking on doors was until I started campaigning. So people actually expect you, especially in a small city like Stafford, no one will vote for you because, again, you don't have a D or R next to your name. It's a nonpartisan race.
Yeah.
People are not going to vote for you unless you go talk to them. And you've got to go knock on their door or pick up the phone or run into them at an event and ask them, hey, please vote for me. I had a neighbor, it was funny, I asked him to vote for me and his wife didn't vote for me. I was like, hey, why didn't you vote for me? She's like, oh, you never asked me. I was like, oh, I didn't realize I had to come back around to go ask
Right.
you. So that was a tough thing. And then the second thing was having identity politics. I didn't realize how important, like, people really, and again, in order to win in a city like Stafford, where it's very diverse, you've got, all the big four major groups are about 25% of the population. You can't just win if you have only, Asians voting for yourself or South Asians in my case.
Yeah.
You've got to get everyone to vote for you. But one of the things I learned is people are just, if they see someone that looks like them, they automatically are more likely to vote for them, which was a very surprise for me because I never thought that way. I always voted, best candidate. But that was an interesting thing that I kind of learned throughout the process. And now I'll actually take a second to talk about Camosaic. So I am an absolute product of our Smiley, like everything that the Smiley network has done for students. I'm kind of part of that first generation of kids that came up with all these amazing programs that were in place. I mentioned SEED earlier. Camp Mosaic's a great example. The sports tournaments that we had, being a youth volunteer. There were so many little programs in my life that I took advantage of that really helped make me who I am. I would absolutely not be where I am if it wasn't for the programs and people like you, Jamil. I mean, you're posting this amazing thing and there's so many great volunteers, and guess what? You're getting paid $0 to do it. So a lot of amazing volunteers who really care about our community are doing this. And so for that, thank you to them, because I would never be here today if it wasn't for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that is amazing. So my Vesh Varani asks, what is advice that you would give someone who's interested in running for office in their city?
I would say get to know the people. Get to know who's currently in office. That is such an important thing, is know who your city council members are, or in my case, school board and city council members. Just get to know who they are and get them to like you. Once they know you are, they're going to give you opportunities to get involved. And one of the great things I had was I had endorsements from many of them. Our former mayor had endorsed me, which was a huge win for me and really helped win that election. Is I had no name recognition outside of being on these commissions and committees, while these elected officials have tons and tons of name recognition. So when you can associate that with yourself and they're saying, hey, this guy's a good guy, you should vote for him, people are just more likely to vote for you. So I have to get to know who's already in office and ask them to endorse you when possible.
No, that makes sense. Rafiq Danani asks, how do you deal with community members? We're in this COVID situation. How do you deal with community members who have sort of a view of the COVID situation that's not particularly science-based, or illogical? How do you have that situation, and how do you deal with that situation?
Yeah, that's actually a really excellent question. So we actually had a big forum just yesterday at Town Hall. That was Town Hall, and we had over 1,000 participants on it, which is, we don't have that kind of involvement in a normal meeting. We don't have that kind of involvement in most town halls. It was a very unique situation. And there's so many questions thrown across, so many opinions. And a lot of people, feel like, oh, we need to have schools open and we need to do this, we need to do that. And it's not scientific based. I think ultimately our goal is to keep our teachers, our staff, and of course, most importantly, our students safe.
Yeah.
And so, I'm in a very lucky position in having a wife who's a physician who's on the front lines of this. And I ask her, like, what's going on? What's the real situation? What is the best and the safest way to do something? And look, at the end of the day, I don't care what other people say as long as I'm keeping the students safe. I think that's much more important. And there's never a right answer. That's one of the things I tell my administration. I'm like, no matter what we do here, guys, there's never going to be a right answer, because people are going to comment one way or the other. And we see it on social media. We see it at different places. But you've got to know and have conviction that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. On a related item, Nawade Ladakh asks about this report in the newspaper recently that some schools are suggesting that, or some teachers suggesting that there may be strikes if safety requirements aren't met, right? How do you all, as a school board, how do you all think about that challenge? Obviously, you want to get students back to school, you want to educate them, but you want to do it safely, and you want to protect your teachers, right? I mean, these are both important values. How do you all think about this, and how do you ensure that the students, the teachers get educated, but also remain safe as you're starting to come out of this environment? What is the board? How does the board think about these problems? Or how do you think about this as an elected official?
Absolutely. So it's an excellent question as well. For me, it becomes really personal. I think for a lot of us, it becomes very personal. We have several members on their board who have, a significant other or someone else in their family. I am one of those members. I have my sister-in-law is actually a teacher. She teaches kindergarten at our district.
Oh, wow.
And so for me, that's really, really important to understand. And again, these people are my friends. I get to know these teachers. I get to know our staff. I know
Sure.
every single one of them. So it doesn't just become, just this nebulous, this teacher somewhere that this protester do that. These are my friends who could lose their lives if we put them in an unnecessary risk, family members. So that's something that's super, super important. And, one of the sad things, I'm sure you've probably seen this too, is teachers are starting to write their wills now. That's scary. And that should not happen in our society. And look, we are healthcare workers, and we're very thankful for our healthcare workers because they are putting themselves at risk. But they have no choice, right? If they didn't exist, a lot more people would get hurt. We actually have a choice. We can actually keep our teachers out of danger where possible. And look, there's a balancing act, right? We also want our kids to go back to school and we want them to learn. But number one is safety. And that's why, it goes back to my platform. How do we keep them safe? And for me, it's just absorbing information because there's a lot of different places that information comes from. And I also try to keep it to where, this is another place where my professional, my personal life overlap. We own a lot of communities and apartments, and we figure out what best practices are those for there, right? Because we can't just close down apartment complexes. Like, people need a place to live.
Right.
So the things we do there and the data we use there, and again, I have access to some tremendous data, on that side of my life. I'm able to kind of utilize that to really make informed decisions.
That makes a lot of sense. So I want to go back to sort of the role that your upbringing as sort of an immigrant, coming from an immigrant community here in the United States. What did that have to do with you sort of getting you to run for office, the way you handle yourself in office? Is there an impact between the two, or are they unrelated in your mind?
I think there absolutely is. I think one of the things when you grow up and kind of come from this immigrant community is you don't necessarily have, all the resources, and your parents haven't been through the same school system. And so we have a lot of students in our district that are actually also from this similar situation. And one of the things that, the challenge is, a lot of people take for granted, this is how schools work, and this is what, this is how you register for classes, this is how GPAs work, this is how this works, this is how that works. That doesn't necessarily exist, My parents didn't know what a GPA was until I kind of told them, and they learned. And that's typical, right? Most families that come from immigrant, it's a very different cultural shift. And how can we empower our teachers and our counselors and our staff to handle those kind of children is very important, because we become their primary source at that point. Again, and I'll go back to, our Smiley institution. We actually have an amazing program for our Smileys that not everyone has. It's the 8th grade mentorship program. I was actually a volunteer for that. And that was a really, really cool thing that we got to participate in, where we actually taught 8th graders how to get to be a good high school student, what it takes to get to a good university when you start high school. I didn't know things my freshman, sophomore year, which I wish I did. I was like, oh my gosh, I was making these mistakes by not taking the right classes, not doing the right things to prepare myself for college. So we try to enable our students and try to do that for our students.
Yeah. No, it's pretty amazing. So I want to come back to this point you made just now about sort of faith and the role that sort of the opportunities that we gave our students. What role did sort of your faith, you mentioned Camp Mosaic and all this stuff, a lot of our programs, what role did sort of the programs and your faith and your community, the Somali community in particular, what did that play in the decisions and the way you handle yourself in office? Is it, again, I want to ask the same question is it about coming from an immigrant community? Is it relevant? How is it relevant? What difference does it make to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the funny things that did happen to me, though, so most people in Stafford, when I tell them, they ask you, what religion are you, or what church do you go to? And I'm like, I'm a member of the Somali community. They're like, oh, okay. And they'll pause. I'm like, yeah, you do smile a lot, so that makes sense. And so they have no idea what a Somali is, right? Right. They know Muslim.
Even though they live there in Sugarland and the Jamaat Khanas, they're all there, still don't know what's going on. Exactly.
Not very familiar in Stafford, unfortunately. Yeah. So it was really funny. So part of it's kind of educating people and saying, hey, here's what we are, and everyone knows Islam. I mean, Jamil, you remember a world, I remember a world pre 9/11 where people had never heard what a Muslim was, or if they did, they didn't really know much. And all of a sudden, we're all kind of thrown in the spotlight, and the first exposure people have is not a good one. And so growing up post of that has been a really interesting experience. And it's almost feels like at times we're kind of fighting to break that stereotype. Um, and so when I go to people, I explain to them who I am and what I am and what my values are. One of the beautiful things about being a Smiley is we have our system and our beliefs and with the things of plurality, the things that education, the things that we value, volunteerism, are really very much lined up with what is American values and what, really line up well with being on a school board. Being a volunteer is something, school board members in Texas get paid $0.00. A lot of people are kind of surprised by that. And so one of the rewarding things about doing that and being on a school board is you get to actually volunteer. And we had the picture you see right now is we actually had a food drive that we hosted at our school during COVID times. And this was such an interesting experience. It was such a rewarding experience. And, I was so glad that we were able to do it. But one of the eye-opening things that happened is we had over 2,000 cars line up for this. Wow. And the need was so great. I had no idea we're going to have such a big need for something like this. And that was kind of scary. And then we also, in talking about rewarding things, one of the great things is you get to be in graduations. So when you're on a school board, you actually get to give the kids their diplomas and you get to have that graduation experience. One of the unique things we had happen this time was we actually couldn't do a real graduation. We did a COVID distance graduation, as we called it. And what that really meant was the kid walks in and the family waits in this little square, and the kid gets their diploma. No one touches anything, and we kind of all stand back and we have our masks on. So I'm smiling, but you can't really tell I'm smiling in these pictures. And so we did one of those, and that was actually a really, really incredible moment is going through. And a lot of these kids, remember these seniors, they were at spring break when this happened. So they never got to come back. They never got to see their friends, their teachers, get their prom, get all those things that are, celebrate being a senior. And so that's how we did our graduation was we kept a distance and we had them take a picture in front of the superintendent and a school board trustee. And that's me standing on there and if you look closely in my eyes, you can tell I'm smiling. But and so we did one of those, and that was a really, really rewarding experience. And the incredible story, so that this graduation ended at 7 p.m. And we had our second last kid show up at 6:30. And so we're all kind of hanging out, waiting. And then we get a kid that shows up at 6:55 p.m. And he comes without any parents, without any family, and just walks in by himself. And they announce him. And what was really incredible is our staff saw this. And everyone that was volunteering for the event came inside and kind of stood in that family square. And that was the loudest that room had ever been, was for this kid who came without any guests. Wow. I heard his story, and his story was really incredible. And his story really exemplifies and makes you realize why it's so important to do the things that we do. He was coming straight from work. This kid was a high school senior, lived by himself, supported himself because his family did not support him at all. And so he was working at an auto mechanic shop. And where did he learn those skill sets? Well, that actually was from our school. We actually started a program years ago where we created, for some kids who want more hands-on learning or aren't planning on going to college but want to learn a trade, they can learn mechanics. So he learned that skill set. And now this young kid who's 17, 18 years old is working, supporting himself at an auto mechanic shop. And he shows up to this graduation, his work clothes, and he throws his gown on top of that at 6:55, 5 minutes before we're about to shut down graduation. It's just the most incredible feeling. It just absolutely gave me goosebumps when I heard that story.
It's pretty amazing. So, it's obviously a crazy environment we're in. And with all the stuff that's going on with COVID, we have an election coming up. People are listening today. They want to make a difference, right? They want to do what you've done. They want to have an impact, right? What advice can you give folks of all ages, the kids and the adults? How can they get involved? We're in a moment where people want to be involved. How can they do that?
Absolutely. So number one, go vote, which I assume everyone here is already doing. I think it's just raising your hand. Like I said, say you want to be involved. Say you want to go do something. Go find a candidate you like and say, I want to volunteer. I want to help out. I want to help you do what you want to do. And don't be scared. I think one of the biggest fears, I know I had this fear, was, what if I lose? What if I don't win this candidate? Are people going to laugh at me? Like, are they going to say, oh my God, I can't believe he did that? Don't be scared of that. One of the things I learned was, win or lose, people appreciate the fact that you had the guts to put your name on that ballot. It is not easy to put your name on that ballot. And it's a scary situation. You're really putting yourself out there and you really feel exposed because, you're asking people, it feels like a popularity contest, which it really is.
Yeah.
You're asking people, hey, vote for me because I'm a good guy. Like, here's my background. Please vote for me. It's a scary situation, but don't be scared of it. It's very, very doable. And I think if you live in a community and you want to be involved, run for office. Don't be intimidated by it. Reach out to people who are already in office. Ask them for tips. There's so much I learned from current elected officials who told me, hey, here's how you get things from the county. So you can actually figure out who voted before. And so they're more likely to vote again. So go talk to them first. Don't go talk to everyone. Talk to the houses that vote. Things like that you kind of learn, you can really pick up by either being on a campaign or just talking to people who've campaigned.
Interesting. And by the way, I noticed that one of our audience members has their hand up. I can't actually get to ask you questions. So if you've got a question, just put it in the Q&A box. We do have about 4 minutes left, and we will end on time. So I want to think about this. Is it really? I mean, obviously you're a pretty normal person, right? I mean, can ordinary people, immigrant communities, minority faiths, can they really make a difference? I mean, okay, you're on the school board, right? And I mean, you're giving teachers pay raises and cutting taxes, and I don't know how that works, but I mean, can other people really make a difference the way you have?
Absolutely. I think people can make a much larger difference than I have. I sit on a local school board, but imagine if people were sitting on all our school boards or people were running for state office or federal office. You absolutely can make a difference. And one of the weird things that, we all have this idea is, the people who are elected are, somewhat kind of this ivory tower, as I mentioned earlier. It's really not. It's just ordinary.
It's you.
Now it's weird enough. It's me. And, people still call me Trusty Hammer. I'm like, no, you could just call me Ash. Like, I'm not any special. I'm not different. Nothing about me has changed, before May 13th to after May 13th of last year. Nothing. Just that I'm elected and I get to say this title and I get to make a difference. But I'm still the same guy. And I think that's one of those things. So get involved. And I think anyone can do it. And look, I have a full-time job and I do this. And for me, I did not, a lot of people think, oh, if you want to get into this, the public realm, you've got to give up that full-time job. You actually don't. You can actually pick to be in local offices. And, in a state like Texas, you can even go up to the state legislative, which again, they pay their state legislator $7,200. That's not a full-time job. That basically means every single state legislator has a full-time job. So find an office if you're passionate about, go do it. And again, you don't have to give up your career. You don't have to give up your livelihood. This is just something in addition. A lot of Ismailis already do this. We do SEBA, we do things in Jamaat Khana, we like to volunteer. That's in our DNA. So this is a great opportunity to go volunteer and go make a difference in government and really have a vast impact on, the future, in my case, of, all these students.
Yeah. Well, in the 2 minutes we have left, what is the one concrete thing a person could do tomorrow, right? If they're listening in, they want to be like you, they want to get involved, they want to do something. What can they do tomorrow to get involved and have an impact?
That's a great question. So tomorrow, so we're in election year, which is really interesting. So I think they figure out who's running for election. Go talk and go to a local election. Don't necessarily go all the way, I'm going to go to the national election, the presidential election.
Yeah.
Go find a local election. Figure out who those candidates are. And just pick up the phone and you can go to their website, talk to those candidates. If nothing else, you'll learn something about them. You'll learn how they run. And you may end up liking one of these candidates. And you may end up supporting one of these candidates and being on their team. So just pick up the phone or reach out, email. If you don't want to pick up the phone, reach out to a candidate that's currently running for office.
Awesome. All right, Ash, great advice. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. The hour's gone really fast. Just for folks in the audience, please join us 2 weeks from today, same time, 9 p.m. Eastern, August 13th, with Sugar Land Council Member Noshad Karmali. So watch, you have something from Sugar Land just right down the street. So thank you again, Ash. You're an inspiration. I really appreciate it. Keep up your amazing service. And thanks to everybody for coming. Have a great night.
Thank you very much, Jamil. Good night.